Great. Thanks so much for the opportunity to be here. I was joking with Andrew before we started that who needs enemies when your friends invite you to talk about your failures in front of national audiences. So thanks for the invitation. Let me see. First failure is getting through the slides. There we go. So I'm going to use a few of the failures that I've experienced to talk about, I think, some ways that you can start to think about reframing. And I won't even touch on the many things that we face every day in our academic worlds related to papers and grants and whatnot. I don't have any relevant disclosures. I don't do minimally invasive surgery. This is my first time at SAGES. Thanks again for having me. Even though I had no really idea what I wanted to do when I entered medical school, I was very much fell in love quickly with the OR. I love being in the OR, and in fact, I really never left during my surgical rotation, so much so that I found myself very unprepared for the shelf exam, and ended up mostly done to that result. To getting a B in surgery. Even though I had done really well in the rotation, had gotten good comments from the residents and faculty I worked with, it was that very average score that left me with a B. And similar to Andrew, people asking me if I was sure I wanted to do surgery. I talked a lot with our program director at Vanderbilt, where I attended medical school, John Tarpley, and he had a really honest conversation with me. He said, you know, if you want to do surgery, you might consider applying for a prelim spot. That wasn't really an option for me. I had taken a military scholarship to go to medical school, and I'd been given a full deferment from the Navy to do civilian residency, and I really needed to match to a categorical spot. And it would have been really easy at the time to shift gears, to maybe go into the military and match or choose a different specialty. But I really, through lots of conversations with friends and mentors, I think the first step is to really, as Andrew demonstrated a number of stories, is to move away from like the fear and the shame that comes with failure and instead embrace courage. And what I came to realize that it wasn't that one result on one test that defined who I was or my, competitiveness for a residency spot or how I was going to perform as a resident. And so I did enter and sort of put my faith that hopefully I was going to match into a categorical spot. And it did work out for me, thankfully. Some of the residents and faculty that I worked for really advocated for me strongly towards the end, and I sort of made it over the finish line to match to stay at Vanderbilt. I was talking to Julianne before. We were commenting on some of the recent medical students we've trained and how if we were going through the match now, we'd probably end up in community programs. And I said I almost did that back in 2003. But Vanderbilt was really a phenomenal place for me to be and train. And not only did I continue to fall in love with surgery, but it was where I also really fell in love with academic surgery and health services research. I got my master's in public health while I was there, and it's when I first sort of knew who Justin Dimick was, and really sort of found what I thought my career would be in academic surgery and what my dream job would look like. And it definitely wasn't this. So after I finished general surgery residency, I had to fulfill my active duty obligation in the Navy. There was really not an opportunity to go on and do fellowship at the time. And so within about 6 weeks of finishing residency, I was the surgeon on an aircraft carrier deployed to the Middle East. And it was not what I wanted. I wasn't doing any teaching, wasn't able to do research. And about a year and a half later, I was redeployed to Afghanistan again, nowhere near my dream job of academic surgery. But what I learned through that experience, and one of the things I think again, what Andrew touched on many times, an opportunity for reframing failures to really think about blooming where you're planted. So even though those 4 years in the Navy weren't what I wanted to be doing at the time, I did recognize that I had an opportunity to grow in many, many ways that would become important down the road. I've learned to become an independent general surgeon with really no backup. I learned to operate in poorly resourced environments, and I learned how to motivate and lead teams, and obviously all those things are critical skills that I use every day. Carla talked a lot about this. I think this is really a fundamental book to understand learning and growing through failure. I use it every day. I try to for my own self to continuously adapt and maintain a growth mindset. It also comes in very helpful for my children. And it's really this idea of, do you look at failure as like a judgment on your predetermined skill or position, or do you look at failure or challenge as an opportunity for growth? After I finished my time in the Navy, I was really excited to move back to academia. And as I was finishing up, I had made the decision to pursue fellowship training in surgical oncology, again, with the idea that I would do a fellowship and then hopefully get a job in academic medicine. My fellowship application process was really very much interrupted by personal tragedy, and that was that my mom was diagnosed with melanoma and pretty rapidly progressed to being in hospice care right in the middle of what was a very short and relatively abbreviated application process. And due to sort of needing to see her and take care of her and attend her funeral, I ended up needing to cancel a lot of fellowship interviews that I would have gone on otherwise. And so at the end, I ended up with a pretty short list. I had been encouraged by some of my mentors to obviously apply to Memorial and Anderson. I had managed to sneak in an interview at University of Louisville, which is where my mom was, where my parents are from and where I grew up. And then I had made a very short day trip. I was stationed at the time in Jacksonville, Florida, and I drove down to Moffitt and Tampa to get one more interview under my belt. Probably about a week after finishing up interviews, my mom died. We had our funeral, and I immediately had to return back to work. I was, again, a general surgeon in the Navy. And it was about a month after that that we had match day. And I was shocked to see what popped up on my list. And to say I was disappointed was really an understatement. I was really devastated. And it was for a few reasons. One is I felt I'm very fairness motivated, and I felt like it wasn't a fair reflection of, I was a general surgeon. I had all this experience that these other graduating residents didn't have. I felt like it was a judgment on what I had done. But also, more importantly, I really hadn't had a good experience when I went to Moffitt to interview. It was in the middle of August. It was raining sideways. There was a hurricane, and I had some weird interactions. And so when I matched, not only was I disappointed in my result, but I had matched somewhere that I really was not that interested in training. And for about a month, I was pretty confident I wasn't going to go. And actually, as I was preparing for this talk this week, my spouse said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Oh, I'm talking about resilience and learning from failure." And she said, "Oh, you're going to talk about how you almost didn't go to fellowship." And she was like, "Can you believe that, 7 or 8 years ago, sitting in Jacksonville, that you would be talking about, this?" But I really just decided I wasn't going to go. I was just going to go back to Nashville or Kentucky and be a general surgeon, and maybe I just wasn't cut out for academic surgery. But fortunately, thanks to lots of friends again and mentors, I didn't make any rash decisions, and instead I decided to move from being upset and furious to curious. And this is a reframing concept that Janet Dombrowski, who's an executive coach that works closely with us at Michigan, is always this particular reframing exercise. You can use this every single day in your life, right? And so what I did was I said, okay, I'm not going to make the decision based on this one-day experience I had there. So we decided to make a couple more trips down to Tampa, which, by the way, is much nicer in February than in August. Started to explore the city. I got to know a few more of the mentors and fellows, and it turned out, I said, okay, I'll give this a try. And my first rotation, I was assigned to the cutaneous oncology service, and for, I think, obvious reasons, pretty quickly fell in love with taking care of patients with melanoma. And really, my fellowship experience couldn't have been any better. And two of my closest mentors also had something in common. They had both trained at Michigan. And so several years during my second year in fellowship, when what really was my dream job opened up, those mentors were able to talk to their former partners about me. And so I think that is the final lesson of leadership, is sometimes failure is really a stroke of luck. So thanks so much for having me and for a terrific panel. Thank you.
So